So I've been on PornHub a lot recently, actually using it as my primary search engine just to spice things up. You know, Google always gives it to you straight, but PornHub, they'll give it to you any way you want it at varying intensities and on a whole spectrum. It's pretty exciting. Not that helpful if you're trying to troubleshoot the printer at the office, but it'll surprise you. I was just looking up dinner recipes before this, and I've always loved to cook, but I'm thinking of becoming a chef now. You know, the magic really happens in the kitchen. That's where it is. And I think I could add to that. On the menu tonight, I was thinking something stripped down, raw, healthy, like peaches. They're always in season, apparently. Look it up. Anyway, hi. How are all you sweet little tiny baby dreamers out there? I hope you're well, and welcome to a new episode of the nnight Show with me, your host, Benjamin Font. We're back. We're back, baby. Last week we delved into In Full Bloom, a letter, a love story. Part 1, which explored Exhibits A and B in a case that will continue to unfold tonight in Part 2 with Exhibit C, which is the first letter of such words as calamity, catastrophe, or the country Canada, where the author of the letter is writing from as a fugitive, and also the first letter in the name Claire. Claire. We've been waiting very patiently this past week, so let's not wait a second longer. Let's just relax and wind down, cuddle up, and enjoy. Welcome to nnight. Hey there. Everybody comfortable? Good. If you need to go catch up on Part 1 from last week, go ahead and do that right now. You can rejoin us a second later and not miss a thing. If you're already caught up and you're anxiously anticipating tonight's reading, Part 2, well then, let's just get into it. Here we are. This is In Full Bloom, a letter, a love story, Part 2. I knew that my general disposition had begun to change, that my usually quiet, reserved temperament had turned into an exceedingly arrogant and suave farce that I carried on not only in bars, but in coffee shops, in the grocery store, in movie theaters, etc. But I didn't know exactly to what extent. It continued to remain unclear to me until the actual moment it happened, and then there was no turning back. I regret to inform you at this time, though I must if I'm to paint a complete picture, that there's a third response to being repeatedly told that you look like someone else, which is to allow the person telling you such to harbor their misconception as truth, and subsequently believe you to actually be the person they thought you to simply look like. Some would say that this third response is one of depravity, and that only a person out of their wits is capable of allowing such an atrocity to take place. I urge you, though, Mr. Bloom, to ignore what those people would say, because there was nothing cold or calculated or criminal about my actions. I need for you to comprehend that the way it happened was completely organic, innocent, and my response was more out of temporary confusion and love drunkenness than anything else. Prior to the event I'm about to describe, which will continue to be known as Exhibit C, it did not seem unusual to me that one day I decided to keep only my mustache. Men in high spirits often do funny things to their appearances to show outwardly their inner peace or happiness. So, as I was shaving, I kept the mustache and I laughed at it. I cut my hair short too. It wasn't until recently, just moments before I began writing this letter, that I truly inspected the effects these alterations had on the appearance of my face. The mustache seemed to bring my cheekbones out and the cheeks themselves in, casting subtle shadows in the hollows on each side of my mouth. It also made my nose thinner, daintier, if you will, like yours, Mr. Bloom. The haircut brought out the framing of my face, the jawline becoming infinitely sharper, the chin pointier, and all of this coming together in the eyes, large and brown with the brows nestled closely over top, the one eyebrow jutting slightly upward mischievously. The eyes had not been changed one bit, but in the setting of my other altered features, I was able to take notice of the quality in them that might allow a person encountering my face for the first time to deceive themselves and say, "You know who you look like?" Well, I suppose I might just maybe look like you to some people then, Mr. Bloom. I guess it is a gentleness in the eyes, a suppressed hint of some abstract wound that expresses a degree of genuine heartfelt lovesickness. Some softness that is not a part of me or a part of you, respectively, but a standard emotion that invariably draws the attention of dreamy young women. I stand by my initial remark here, though, in saying that I don't think we look alike. Admitting, however, only that there's possibly something in each one of our faces that evokes the same reaction from women that want to be in love. When I left my apartment that afternoon, Mr. Bloom, it was with my freshly altered appearance that, in retrospect, added to the illusion that I was someone other than myself, you. Only the eyes had yet the look of lovesickness about them. That would come shortly. I enjoyed going to the movies by myself, especially the matinee, which is rarely attended by more than a handful of people, and that was my plan on this particular day with nothing more in mind. I saw her at concessions as I was purchasing my ticket. Claire. Wasn't that the name of your co-star's character in that movie where you planned to commit suicide? If my memory serves me right, which it usually does, then what a coincidence. Of course, I didn't know that her name was Claire yet. All I knew was that there was a gorgeous young woman standing there at concessions at that age where everything had come out of its awkward stages and settled nicely, where the immaturity of the experimental period had passed to, leaving her like a flower in full bloom at the end of spring, stable and confident in the dawn of the long summertime of her life. She was more than the unimaginative, breathtaking Mr. Bloom. She was a nauseous feeling creeping over the body from head to toe, standing at about 5'4" in what looked like a jumper, which was a white, short-sleeved cotton blouse on the top, with a thin black belt separating it from deep navy blue cotton shorts on the bottom that were suggestive, showing all of the knee and a few inches of cinnamon and vanilla thigh above, without being immodest. It was an unbelievably warm day for late February. She had a charcoal gray sweater draped over her arm in case of cold in the theater. The ankle-high boots on her little feet were fairy-like. My muscles trembled, contracting and relaxing at random against my bones. My eyes vibrated in my skull, the pupils dilating. At one point she turned her head so that a beam of sunlight coming through the windows illuminated several of the stray blondish hairs on her otherwise neat head, the hair in back pulled into a low, smooth ponytail, while the hair in front was pushed behind the ears sweetly, permitting me that not uncommon yet certainly longed-for vision of a man's dream woman materializing in real life as an angel with halo and all. Don't let this angelic comparison put you off, Mr. Bloom. If this were a literary work, I would obviously try for a more unusual image than the angel, but I can't refrain from using the cliche here in this letter, when what I'm after is providing a truthful account. The fact that I briefly saw her as an angel, no matter how often the symbolism has been used, remains true to me, and in that fact alone, it should be considered remarkable. Continuing then, with the visual foreplay of Exhibit C. Just as I was getting in line for concessions without really wanting anything, Claire was receiving her purchases, a small bag of popcorn, a bottled water, and junior mints. She took them over to her friend, a girl who looked quite a bit younger than her, though dressed similarly. Maybe her little sister, I thought. The girl whispered something into Claire's ear, who immediately turned and looked at me. I didn't look away soon enough to avoid making eye contact with her, and at the time I didn't think that was an altogether bad thing. Because when her eyes met mine, having already acquired the love-sickness appeal to them from watching her in line, the sides of her mouth curled ever so slightly upward in a shy smile before she instinctively hid herself, pretending to be talking to her sister about some movie poster. Her sister still stared in my direction conspicuously and secured for me the knowledge that this brief locking of eyes could only mean actual verbal confrontation at some point, at the least a hello or an excuse me. The girls went into the bathroom. Probably, I ventured proudly, they went into the bathroom to discuss the man they had just seen at concessions and plot different ways of engaging him in conversation. I found myself at the concession counter, still not really wanting anything and feeling somewhat lightheaded, so I settled quickly and inexplicably on a cup of ice. As I filled my cup with water from the drinking fountain, the movies were being called to start. The 20-so people in the lobby dispersed and were ushered into 4 separate theaters. I casually took a seat a couple of rows from the back of Theater 3, directly in center. The movie that was showing deserves no mention. It should only be noted that it was rated R and that you played no part in it, Mr. Bloom. Soon after I sat down, Claire and her sister walked into the dim-lit theater just as the previews were beginning, and it both relieved me that I was already seeing Claire again and caused me great anxiety, because what if she sat next to me? They started up the stairs towards the back with the young one leading, and halfway up, Claire took notice of me, my heart pounding, softly pushing her sisters back into an aisle 4 rows in front of me. They didn't go to the direct center of the row as most people would. Instead, they sat down about a quarter of the way in at such an angle from my position where I'd be able to see at all times the light from the screen playing off the soft, unblemished skin of Claire's neck. She put her sweater over her shoulders, and as she did so, she turned her body even further in my direction, knowingly giving me the fantastic full view of the symmetry of her face, flaunting its flawlessness for me. She smiled slightly without looking up at me, and a red light shot out of the screen that reflected off her face and made it look as if she were blushing. She turned back around to watch the movie. I remember thinking it was a tremendous blessing to have entered the theater first that day. Had Claire and company gotten their desired seats in back, it would have left me sitting a few rows in front of them, which would have been unimaginable torture. I would not have had the audacity to peek backward at any point during the movie, but resigned myself to a rigid and distracted forward-facing position, my back thoroughly cramping from the tension, wondering whether or not there were the little eyes of a beautiful young woman 4 rows behind me burning into my flesh. As it was, sitting behind Claire offered me a great amount of authority over the situation. Over my head was cast the dissipating and ultimately intangible beam of light from the projector that magically produced a picture on screen, which was then viewed by an audience member here in the 3rd row, a couple there in the 8th row, Claire and sister in the 13th row, then me in the 17th, and no one in the 2 rows behind me. Every image that came from the projector to the screen, then received by my eyes and gone into my brain, was a dual image that was filtered through its peripheral atmosphere as well, which, namely, was Claire, sitting there with her sweater over her shoulders and the light refracting off her cheek. I was able to follow the movie itself while also following Claire, easily surmising what her reactions were to the movie and therefore gaining a basic idea of her personality. During the parts of the movie which I perceived as funny, I saw that Claire too thought they were funny as her shoulders trembled and the one side of her mouth came into view, widening in smile onto what was otherwise just her cheek and the corner of her eye squinting. During the serious parts, she sat solemnly forward in her seat, engrossed. On principle, I enjoy movies. Even when it's not a particularly good movie I'm watching, I'm usually entertained. Though, of course, I do prefer good movies over bad ones. However, while viewing the movie in question, I began hoping for any and all evidence of the latter because I found that an implausible or ridiculous development elicited a look back from the girl 4 rows in front of me, Claire, turning herself slightly to make a look of exaggerated disgust at her sister, though really for my amusement, while glancing toward my seat from the corner of her smiling eye. The worse it was, the longer she would look, the more her nose would adorably scrunch up in distaste, the more my body would ache. Each time it occurred, it was as if a tiny string were pulled within my body, and a fresh wave of wonderful nausea went through me. My hands were clammy. My heart palpitated in a way that usually meant I'd had too much coffee or smoked too many cigarettes. I did my best to suppress it until it was a small but significant buzz emanating from my core. Just now, B landed on the outside of my window, displaying his underside against the glass. The entirety of his little body, from fuzzy head down to stinger, is thrusting on a 2 count, coming at the glass, then away, then at it again, appearing to be an attempt of pollination. He's not a sick bee either or anything. He looks to be in good health. But what perfect timing! His pulsation mimics to a T what I felt inside of my body in the dark glow of the movie theater. That rhythmic surge of futility, of the brain sending messages to act through the body before a physical response is feasible, my nerves curling up into tight balls. In the end, the movie turned out to be all right. Overall, there were only a handful of questionable moments throughout, and so I was able to take with me a handful of alluring glances from Claire, which is enough to make a man ill for a lifetime. As I exited the bathroom from the mandatory after-movie piss, I noticed that Claire was standing not far away, alone, appearing to be in wait for her sister to come out of the women's room, which was right next to the men's. Eye contact happened naturally, as did a smile. I broke the mutual stare while closing the space between us, walking towards the doors that led onto the street with my nerves curling further inward and my stomach rocking as if on water. I had to get by her to leave, just one last look to remember her by. "Excuse me," came the soft, smooth voice of honey mixed into milk, now right beside me, from the young woman whose face still haunts me. I stopped in my tracks. She started, "Are you?" "Yeah?" I said nervously, my tone going slightly up at the end as in question, making reply to her initial "excuse me," while accidentally interrupting her following venture. "I'm sorry," she said, momentarily averting her gaze with a smile. "Hi, I'm Claire." She smiled fully now, sticking out her hand just far enough away from her body for me to assume she intended for me to shake it. By now, she was wearing her sweater in the proper way, and the right sleeve covered the bottom portion of the palm of her extended hand. Forgetting to introduce myself, I replied only with a dopey smile and a wavering "hi," as I shook her tiny extended hand and fell in love with it for being so incredibly small and warm. Then, "Nice to meet you." To which Claire heartbreakingly answered, "Nice to meet you too, oh." Before I continue with the particulars of ensuing events, let us briefly examine this crucial moment wherein the whole fabric of my existence changed and the third response was taken by complete accident. It all boils down to this. As I exited the movie theater, I was extremely agitated by what could be considered as nearly 2 hours of abstract flirtation, along with its accompanying thoughts and the effects those have on a solitary body in the dark. I headed for the bathroom for a piss, and as I did so, I noticed Claire walking in the opposite direction. Again, my reaction was torn. I was relieved that my torment was over, and also sad because it was over, at the expense of this beautiful young woman's departure. While in the bathroom, I mourned over my loss and daydreamed about unlikely chance encounters later on. So to come out of the bathroom then and see that Claire was still in my orbit was a great surprise. Very confusing. It caught me off guard, and for a split second, I even questioned the authenticity of my sighting. Had I fallen asleep in the bathroom, standing up at the urinal? No man of reason could ever say yes to that question. I knew better, which meant only that this was the real thing and therefore had the potential of being humiliating and hurtful. I decided that the only thing to do was smile at her with the forlorn look of loss I had acquired naturally while daydreaming in the bathroom, and take her in completely through the eyes one last time in order to catalog her image to perfect memory. It was startling to have this new plan foiled by such a sweet sound, that discreet seduction of her calm voice, which she believed to have used to express these words. "Excuse me, are you, oh, Bloom?" And to which she believed I responded, "Yeah." The way I see it, it was a simple mistake of my answer to her address, with an under-exaggerated rising tone being interpreted as an interjection to the actual, and obvious if I were you, Mr. Bloom, question at hand. It could have been easily cleared up, had after she called me by your name, I stated that I was in fact not you, but show me a man that would interrupt a conversation with a beautiful young woman over such trivialities as a name, especially in the overstimulated state that I was in. Show me, and I'll lay the matter to rest. As this was not the case, being that I, like any other man in the given situation, did not pay heed to this misaddress, telling myself that it was some auditory trick, I'm unable to lay the matter to rest. If I were a man of extraordinary conscience, Mr. Bloom, then it would be a different story and my current predicament would not exist. This letter would not need to be written. Ignoring the implications of the dialogue itself, still baffled, sweating, fearful of a possible delirium, I asked Claire if she'd like to go for a drink. She agreed, and when her sister came out of the bathroom, she asked me to hold on for a moment as she went to discuss it with her. Excitement was apparent in their body language from a distance. They came back together, beaming, and they both joined me. The place the girls chose was a coffee shop around the corner from the movie theater. At the time, I thought it was a very tasteful and charming decision, which I attributed to the fact that Claire's sister was probably not of age for something stronger. Exceedingly more enchanting was Claire's choice of drink, hot chocolate. I ordered a Moroccan mint tea, also hot. I can't recall what her sister ordered. In any case, I couldn't really afford all 3 drinks, having just treated myself to a midday movie viewing, but I paid for everything anyway, just to be nice, I said to myself. Both girls thanked me profusely. We sat at a table in a back window of the shop. Claire and I quietly engaged in conversation, her sister thumbing through a magazine meant for young, impressionable girls. It was a great stress to me, that magazine. I kept glancing over at it, nervously anticipating the moment when the sister would come across a picture of you, Mr. Bloom. It's one thing to confuse the person in front of you with another from memory, especially if that memory is held under the assumed distortion of silver screen to real life. But it's an entirely another when there's a photo present to draw comparisons from. Thank God you stayed out of the media that month. Had you been in a drunken bar fight, Mr. Bloom, or overdosed, or done anything equally embarrassing or noteworthy, it would have meant immediate disaster for me. But Claire's delicacy was able to remain unbroken. She clearly thought me to be an extravagant figure, but she eluded the subject. The most she mentioned was the offhand remark, "You look a little different in person, not as fragile or something?" She followed up by taking a sip of her hot chocolate and apologizing. I assured her that it was okay. The casual deceit a man is capable of, Mr. Bloom, continues to perplex and frighten me. One minute he can be, think, or say one thing, and the next he can be, think, or say the complete opposite, both with absolute conviction. And this behavior does more than just convince his audience of his sincerity. It succeeds, usually, in convincing himself of it too. Which is to say, a man is nothing more than his present circumstances and his reaction to them, whether his conscience perceives them as agreeable or not. As I spoke with Claire that afternoon, I was amiable and convincing. I was my full, undiluted self under the imposed guise of O. Bloom. I must say, Mr. Bloom, that you were fantastic company. In Claire's words, you were so candid and down to earth. Her affection was visibly growing. Even without the red glow of the movie screen lighting her cheeks, I noticed more than once that she was blushing, a trait on a woman that invariably endears her to a man. But she had me before that. I would like to take a moment here to provide clarity of my initial intentions, or rather the lack thereof. I did not wish to court beautiful Claire. Pretty and sweet as she was, I hoped only to enjoy her company as all men enjoy the presence of a woman, the sights and smells. I was not looking for love. I've been in love before, and it's a painful thing in the end, even if you're on the upper side of the equation, being the first one to fall out of it, saying nothing of love that's not reciprocated from the get-go. But the reasoning of a man is never consulted when such an emotion arises. There's something in his body that's uncontrollable. It's the way the chemicals are arranged in his brain. It's his genetic predisposition to react positively to attraction, to feel a lightness in the gut, a buzz behind the eyes, a rising below the waist. He cannot alter his nature. He can only choose to either indulge or stifle it. Personally, I've always been an advocate of the come-as-it-may philosophy, even if what comes is accompanied by legal restrictions in most states, save for New Mexico and probably Utah. It was a startling and revelatory thought I had in the back window of the coffee shop talking to Claire. I'm in love. It was equally startling and revelatory, by way of her blushing and her foot always accidentally nudging against mine, to see in her the same exact thought, even though it originated under false pretenses. Typically, people fall in love with ideas of people or things over the reality of them anyway. So her love was not uncommon or unjust. Given the effects of the biological response to attraction, especially when reciprocated, and the muddle of flamboyant precursory events, it's no wonder that I overlooked certain finer points of that afternoon, which I'd like to think would have altered my future course of action. Still, as they say, come as it may. And come it did, strong in the slight frame of a young woman, which is always the most influential and dangerous form. Claire, sensitive without being needy, affectionate without being overbearing, intelligent without being a bore, compassionate without trying to save the world, fun without being tiring, confident without being condescending, sensual without being like me. As for her looks, which I've already given my first impression of, I'm sure you've seen plenty of women. Put together a mental collage of your favorite traits. Imagine those features as being better somehow, radiating. That's what she was for me. That crystalline projection, ineffable, Claire. Speaking softly as we said our goodbyes, her hand lightly below my elbow, Claire and I made arrangements for a later meeting. Numbers were exchanged. Then she left, leaving in her wake a gap between us that would decidedly exist for 1 week. That seems an appropriate place to stop for the evening. And we'll catch up to the third and final part of In Full Bloom, a letter, a love story, next week. And if you want, get yourself a copy of this and we can read along. Or see what I left out or fucked up. In any case, I forgot to take a sippy break tonight. My wrist is very sore from that heavy, heavy book. But I think we should call it a night. I've got some studying to do. You know, you can never put in too much time hitting the books. And yeah, I'll see you next week. All right? And until then, sweet dreams and night-night.